Alright, so we're back, of course, talking about some Final Fantasy VII Remake, and we are here with kind of a follow-up to our last video. Now, this video is not going to be about the cross and stuff with the church, though we are going to talk about that just briefly based on what we're going to discuss here in the video. But it was brought to my attention that there's actually more changes between, like, the endings of games and what's happening earlier in Final Fantasy VII Remake. In this particular case, we're talking about just Remake itself. This doesn't involve episode intermission. And it's actually about the Seventh Heaven sign after the destruction of Sector 7. So what we actually have here is that you actually get to see the Seventh Heaven sign twice after Platefall. Once whenever Tifa, Barret, and Cloud go back to Sector 7 to look for like Jesse Biggs Wedge and survivors and all that other shit. And you also get to see the sign again at the end of the game after we defeat Whisper Harbinger. And if you actually pay attention to how the sign's destroyed, it's actually a little bit different. First off, shout out to the boy, Old Man Sakaki, I don't know how you say the dude's name that did Barret and Dine's arm, for pointing this out, because I had never heard this in the 2.5 or so years that Remake's been out. Like, I just never heard this pointed out or observed. Now, here's why this matters and how it does pertain to our last video. When it comes to the cross missing in Remake, but it's there in episode intermission, one of the arguments for against it, for why it doesn't matter, why it might be a dev error, is that you're looking at in-game versus CGI cutscene, right? So obviously when you're playing as Cloud, you're kind of walking around the world, you're in-game, and the cross is not there. But when you're seeing the Zack scene at the end of episode intermission, that's a CGI cutscene, and those are handled by two different teams. So the idea here is that the people who make like the in-game assets just forgot to put the cross there in the church, and then obviously the CGI cutscene has it, and it was just a mistake by the devs, which if you guys watched my last video, I clearly omitted this from the video because I personally just think it's kind of fucking stupid. For a couple reasons, I just think it just doesn't even matter. For one, the cross itself just seems to be one of the most important things when it comes to the compilation, just because it's in literally everything except base game Remake. It was also in multiple pieces of key art for Remake, so if they already had this in mind, right, they're making Remake, they're making key art for Remake, they have the cross there in the church, I just fail to believe they would just be like, oh, fuck, that cross, we forgot to put that in the game. Like, it's stupid to me. And look, I know we're kind of treading old territory here, but it's important for this video. And then they also had Intergrade come out a year plus later, right? Where the cross is still not in the church, but then there's a cutscene for episode intermission where the cross is there. So if it was a mistake by them not having the cross in base game Remake, it would have been retroactively added to Intergrade. You see why this is stupid? It's a weird conversation to me. Now, putting that aside, because those are my personal thoughts on it, if we go forward with the video with the idea that maybe there are mistakes between like CGI cutscenes and actual in-game assets, when it comes to the Seventh Heaven sign and what we're going to talk about in the video, these are only in-game assets. There's no CGI cutscene shenanigans. The devs aren't just fucking up again. So right here we just have a screenshot of whenever the group goes back to Sector 7. Obviously, the sign's right here. And then right here's the same sign during the ending of the game. And I will put them side by side. I have to rotate one of these images to make it make sense. So here I have images side by side. And without like putting them side by side and rotating one of them, it was kind of hard to like notice the differences right away. But clearly, if you actually take a look at it, you can see that where the first E is in Heaven, there's a big difference here. Because with the Barret scene, like a lot of the letter E is gone. And then also with the ending scene, you have the majority of the letter there. And the slice going through the letter E is quite different. Some of the other differences I noticed were that the V in 7th is visible on the ending scene, but it's not there for the Barret scene. The crack by the V in Heaven in the Barret scene goes all the way down to like the outside border of the sign. Whereas with the ending scene, it clearly does not. And just the holes in both of these signs are different sizes, right? The Barret scene, it's a hell of a lot bigger, and this crack seems to be like going a lot further off to the right, where this almost goes a little bit more straight up. But clearly this hole is smaller than this one, right? So there's a handful of differences between these signs. It's not just like one little small detail, right? There's a couple here. And see, I always thought it was super weird that they put a lot of emphasis on the sign at the end of the game. I've actually paused the scene and tried to like look for anything that might be a hint towards something, like maybe the letters that are missing spell a word, or the letters that are currently left spell a word, etc., etc. Always found it weird. And there's not really a purpose to show the sign again ever in the game, right? We already had our group, Tifa, Barret, Cloud, come across the sign in Sector 7. They already got to mourn the loss of their home, etc., etc., and move on. So there's no reason to show the sign ever again outside of, I guess, maybe we will rebuild type shit, unless there's something different between the signs, which, as we now know, there clearly is. It's very, very similar to what we discussed with the last video with the cross scene with Zack at the end of episode intermission. They linger on the shot. They make you look at that cross, right? The force focus. Zack is blurred. The background's very high definition. Same thing here. They don't just show you the sign or the guys picking up the sign. They linger on the sign for a couple of seconds, and then it switches to Marl. Now, putting aside the dev error discussion, what could this mean for the FF7 Remake story? Well, there's a couple options here. For one, it's just kind of adding more evidence to the possibility of alternate timelines and or alter timeline, because it could just be a separate timeline where Sector 7 was destroyed, Seventh Heaven was destroyed, but it got, shit happened differently a little bit. The sign was destroyed differently. Or, again, an altered timeline where the past history of the planet was changed, and kind of the same discussion here. The sign was destroyed differently. The other kind of interesting concept here is if we're going forward with the discussion that this matters, right? The signs being different, there's a purpose to this. It actually gets rid of the idea that shit inside of the Whisper Dome at the end of the game is unaffected. We obviously talk about the Singularity, and our group inside the Singularity are unaffected by any changes outside of it. That, I think, is like a guarantee, more or less. But it's also been theorized that everything inside the Whisper Dome, pretty much Midgar, was unaffected by any changes. But if the signs are actually different, that kind of defeats that discussion, which I think is kind of cool. And I do believe I've talked about the Whisper Dome idea on the channel before, but I've never been the biggest believer of it, just because we see what appears to be Biggs living at the end of the game, right? That's obviously taking place inside of Midgar, inside of the Whisper Dome, in Sector 5, in the orphanage. So there's already a precedent shown that shit inside of Midgar can be changed. At least that's what we're led to believe. And why I say led to believe is that when it comes to the end of the game, there is a possibility for a lot of misdirection. And for one, when it comes to like the Zack scene, right, there's arguments that to be made, evidence to be looked at, whether or not Zack is or isn't alive. And if you're a believer that Zack is dead, then a lot of the ending is misdirection. And you're shown a lot of like scenes at the end of the game, post like the education stuff, they're just out of context. Like you have no idea when and where you're seeing them. You would think that you're getting a montage of shit taking place after we defeat the Whisper Harbinger, but a lot of this shit can be happening kind of anywhere in time. For one, the big scene itself that we just discussed, you're led to believe with this montage that this is Biggs being saved and recovering from platefall, right? But as we talked about for the last like 2.5 years, how the hell did he get here? Like, how did he get saved on like the staircase or whatever for the Sector 7 pillar, but got drugged multiple sectors over? That doesn't make a lot of sense. But we know that Biggs has a history with this orphanage, right? So who's to say that this scene's not happening in the past at some point? This could be a separate injury. It has nothing to do with what happened in Sector 7. But putting aside maybe that's happened in the past, you also have the misdirection of maybe you're seeing a Biggs that's injured in a different timeline or an altered timeline, and the injury is not from platefall, it's just from something else, right? So like that's a possibility. Like, this is the Biggs you're going to see in like Zack's timeline, air quotes, and he's not injured from platefall, because his injuries would be far worse than just some bandages around the fucking head. The guy was dying. And again, that's the thing with the whole like ending montage. We're seeing a bunch of scenes out of sequence, out of order, out of context. We don't know exactly what we're seeing. Most of it, I would agree, is probably just happening post-defeating Whisper Harbinger. And something to kind of further add to this is during the ending, you're seeing the gold sparkle shit fall during the Zack scene and also the rest of the montage. But those are happening in two different times, right? The Zack final stand happens like 3 months before the events of FF7. So already proof that we're seeing different time frames, right? So who's to say that the rest of the montage is even happening right here now? Now, when it comes to the two different Seventh Heaven signs that we're seeing in the game, I do feel like there's a purpose to it. For one, them just showing the sign again, that's not even necessary, but also lingering on the shot of the sign. And the fact that they're destroyed differently doesn't make sense on like a dev error perspective, because it should just be the same asset, right? There should be one asset of the destroyed sign, and you're just using it in two different parts of the game. But the fact that they're different, I just feel like there's a purpose to that. And the thing is, too, if we just keep falling down the rabbit hole of every time there's something different, man, it's just a dev error. Then nothing matters, nothing makes sense, it's all fucking bullshit. But it's the thing that's where we're going to start wrapping up the video. So, the two different signs in Remake, they are clearly destroyed differently, but do you think it has a purpose? Do you think it matters? Also, is this something you've ever even heard of or noticed? Because this was brand new to me. It absolutely blew my mind. I love that we're 2.5 years into this game's life, and I'm still finding and learning about new shit. But my dudes, that's going to be the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, give a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel, guys. Our news today, more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on notifications. Follow me on Twitter, @JYT. I'm a Discord. Links to those networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys. That was a fast one.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect, we spend it with no shame, we blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine, or leave it like Cobain.